The fluorescent lights of Brooklyn Hospital's emergency room cast everything in a sickly pale glow that made the blood on Marcus Hayes' shirt look almost black. He held his son against his chest, feeling the rapid flutter of Isaiah's heart through the thin fabric of Spider-Man pajamas, and tried to remember how to breathe. The nurse at the intake desk barely looked up from her computer screen as she rattled off questions he'd answered a dozen times before. Name, date of birth, insurance provider, current medications. Marcus's voice came out steady even as his hands shook, muscle memory from 3 years of hospital visits taking over, when his brain wanted to shut down completely. Isaiah's small fingers clutched at Marcus's collar, his breathing shallow and quick. The boy's lips had taken on a bluish tint that Marcus recognized from the last time, and the time before that, each episode worse than the one that came before. 6 years old and already intimately familiar with the architecture of emergency rooms, the particular smell of antiseptic and fear, the way doctors' faces shifted when they looked at his chart. A physician emerged from behind a curtain, younger than Marcus expected, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested the tail end of a double shift. She gestured them toward an exam room without speaking, and Marcus followed, his worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. He'd been asleep when Isaiah cried out, had bolted upright in the darkness of their studio apartment to find his son sitting up on the fold-out couch they shared, one hand pressed against his chest. The doctor worked quickly, stethoscope cold against Isaiah's back. Questions flowing in that calm, clinical tone that somehow made everything feel more urgent rather than less. How long had he been having trouble breathing? Had there been any chest pain? When was his last cardiology appointment? Marcus answered each one, watching his son's face for signs of panic, keeping his own expression neutral even as his stomach twisted itself into knots. The pulse oximeter clipped to Isaiah's finger glowed red in the dim room. 92%. The doctor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she stepped out to order tests, leaving father and son alone with the steady beep of the heart monitor. Isaiah's voice came out small and scared in a way that broke Marcus more than any scream could have. "Am I gonna be okay, Daddy?" Marcus pulled his son closer, pressing a kiss to the top of his head, breathing in the familiar scent of the coconut oil shampoo they couldn't really afford, but bought anyway because it was the same kid Sarah had used. "You're gonna be fine, champ. The doctors are gonna take good care of you." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. 2 hours later, after the chest x-ray and the echocardiogram and the blood draw that made Isaiah cry silent tears he tried to hide, Marcus sat in a consultation room that was somehow worse than the exam room had been. More private, more serious. The kind of space where doctors delivered news that changed everything. The cardiologist was older than the ER physician, with silver hair and steady hands that had probably held hundreds of terrified parents' futures. He pulled up images on a computer screen pointing to shadows and structures that meant nothing to Marcus except that they represented his son's failing heart. "The ventricular septal defect has deteriorated significantly since his last scan 6 months ago." The cardiologist's voice was gentle but firm, delivering facts without softening their edges. "At this rate of progression, we're looking at complete heart failure within 8 to 10 weeks. Marcus heard the words as if from a great distance. His mouth had gone dry, and he swallowed hard before he could form the question he already knew the answer to. "What are our options?" "Surgery, as soon as possible. We'd patch the defect, reinforce the ventricular wall. It's a complex procedure, but Isaiah's young and otherwise healthy. His chances would be good." The word "would" hung in the air between them like a noose. "How much?" The cardiologist's expression shifted, just slightly, in a way Marcus had learned to recognize over 3 years of medical bills and insurance denials and payment plans that never quite covered what they needed to cover. The surgery itself runs approximately $180,000. Your insurance will cover $40,000, leaving a balance of $140,000. Marcus finished the sentence, his voice hollow. I don't have $140,000. We have payment plans available, and there are charitable organizations that sometimes I need to think. Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Can I have some time to think? The cardiologist nodded, understanding in his eyes that made Marcus want to punch something. He didn't need understanding. He needed $140,000 he didn't have and couldn't get, and would never be able to earn in time to save his son's life. Isaiah was asleep in the exam room, curled on his side on the narrow bed, his chest rising and falling with the mechanical assistance of supplemental oxygen. Marcus stood in the doorway watching him, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the way his eyelashes cast shadows in the harsh hospital light. The small hands that still looked like a baby's, even though Isaiah insisted he was a big kid now. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah had always known what to do, even at the end when the leukemia had eaten away at everything except her fierce determination to see their son grow up. She'd made Marcus promise those last terrible weeks that he'd take care of Isaiah no matter what, that he'd never give up. He'd kept that promise for 3 years. He wasn't about to break it now. The attending nurse helped Marcus arrange transport back to their apartment, her kindness almost harder to bear than the cardiologist's clinical detachment. She pressed a folder of discharge papers into his hands, along with a list of resources that might help with the cost of surgery, her eyes full of sympathy that made Marcus want to scream. Outside, the February sky was just beginning to lighten, that particular shade of gray that preceded dawn in Brooklyn. Marcus carried Isaiah to the waiting Uber, the boy barely stirring, still groggy from the sedative they'd given him for the echocardiogram. The driver didn't ask questions, which Marcus appreciated more than the man could know. Their building looked more run down than usual in the pre-dawn light. Graffiti stark against brick, the broken window on the second floor still covered with cardboard from last month's break-in that the landlord hadn't bothered to fix. Marcus climbed the 4 flights of stairs slowly, Isaiah's weight familiar in his arms, and let himself into the studio apartment that barely qualified as a home. 400 square feet, a kitchenette with 2 working burners, a bathroom with water pressure that gave up halfway through a shower. The fold-out couch that served as both his bed and Isaiah's, because the few extra square feet a separate bedroom would require might as well have been on the moon for all Marcus could afford them. Medical debt had a way of making everything impossible. He settled Isaiah onto the couch, tucking the donated blanket with the superhero pattern around his small body, and stood looking at the folder of discharge papers he'd tossed on the kitchen counter. The words blurred together. Emergency surgery required, 8 weeks maximum, $140,000. His phone showed $47 in his checking account. Next paycheck from the janitorial job wouldn't come for another week, and that would be $400 before taxes, most of which was already spoken for by rent and the minimum payments on credit cards he'd maxed out 3 years ago trying to keep Sarah alive. The financial analyst resume sitting on the corner of his desk mocked him with its careful formatting and bullet points highlighting skills that were apparently useless in the current job market. 23 rejection emails in the past 6 months, all of them some variation on the same theme. Overqualified, skills outdated, position filled with a younger candidate willing to work for less. He'd been good at his job once. Senior analyst at a mid-size investment firm pulling down $70,000 a year with benefits and a retirement plan and a future that looked stable. Then Sarah got sick, and the medical bills started piling up faster than insurance could process claims, and someone had to be home during the day to take care of their dying wife while their son learned to read. The choice hadn't even felt like a choice at the time. Of course he quit. Of course, he took whatever work he could find that let him be present for Isaiah during daylight hours. Of course, he accepted that his career was over at 32 because the alternative was letting his family face the end alone. He thought that was the hard part. He thought watching Sarah fade away, holding her hand as she slipped into unconsciousness for the last time, burying her on a cold March morning with Isaiah crying into his chest, he'd thought that was as bad as it could get. Turned out he'd been wrong. Marcus made coffee in the machine he'd found at a thrift store, the kind that sputtered and hissed but still produced something drinkable if you didn't think too hard about it. The sun was coming up properly now, pale light filtering through windows he'd never gotten around to cleaning, and he had exactly 90 minutes before his shift at the restaurant started. Right. Work. Because even though his son needed surgery that cost more than Marcus would earn in 5 years, the bills didn't stop coming and the rent didn't pay itself, and if he missed too many shifts, he'd lose this job too. He showered quickly, the water running cold after 3 minutes the way it always did, and pulled on the black slacks and white button-down shirt that served as his server uniform. The shirt had a small stain near the collar that he'd tried unsuccessfully to remove, but in the dim lighting of Aurelius Restaurant's dining room, no one would notice. No one ever noticed the servers unless something went wrong. Margaret Davis knocked softly before letting herself in, her key turning in the lock with the practiced ease of someone who'd been watching Isaiah since the boy was 3 years old. She was 68, retired, and refused to accept payment for childcare with a stubbornness that rivaled Marcus's own pride. Said she'd raised 4 children of her own and knew what it meant to do it alone. Her eyes went immediately to Isaiah, still sleeping on the couch, and then to Marcus's face. She didn't ask what happened, didn't need to. 3 years of medical crises had made them fluent in each other's silences. "I'll be back by 3, Marcus said quietly, gathering his things. "He's supposed to rest today. Doctor's orders." Margaret nodded, settling into the worn armchair that had come with the apartment, already pulling out her knitting. "We'll be fine. You take care of yourself." The subway platform was crowded with the early morning rush. Nurses ending night shifts and delivery drivers starting their days, and people like Marcus who worked multiple jobs to keep their heads barely above water. He found a spot against the wall and closed his eyes, trying not to calculate how many hours he'd have to work to earn $140,000 at $12 an hour. 11,667 hours. Assuming he could work full-time, which he couldn't because of his night janitorial shift. Assuming he didn't have to pay taxes, which he did. Assuming he could live without eating or paying rent or keeping the lights on. Impossible. The math was impossible. Aurelius Restaurant occupied the ground floor of a historic building in Manhattan's financial district. The kind of place where breakfast cost what Marcus spent on groceries for a week. He clocked in through the employee entrance in the alley, changed into his server apron, and tried to arrange his face into something approximating pleasant professionalism. The floor manager, Claire Bennett, was already in crisis mode over a no-show server and a private dining room reservation for someone important enough to require the good china. She spotted Marcus and her expression shifted from panic to calculation. "Hayes, you're taking the private dining room." His stomach sank. "I've never worked private dining before." "You have now. Marcus called in sick and you're the only one here who doesn't look hungover." She shoved a tablet at him, her fingers flying across the screen. "Guest's name is Victoria Sterling. She owns half the real estate in this city, so don't screw it up. Smile, be invisible, and for the love of everything holy, don't spill anything." Victoria Sterling. Even Marcus, who didn't follow business news or society pages, recognized the name. Sterling Properties had its logo on at least a dozen buildings visible from the subway platform near his apartment. Forbes covers, charity galas, the kind of wealth that existed in a different universe from people who counted out change for the subway. The private dining room was all glass and minimalism. floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the street, a single table set with precision that suggested someone had used a ruler, fresh orchids in the center, silverware polished to mirror brightness, a menu listing items without prices because anyone eating here didn't need to ask. Marcus checked his reflection in one of the windows, smoothed down his collar, and took a breath. 90 minutes. He just had to get through 90 minutes of being professionally invisible. Then he could go home and figure out how to save his son's life. Victoria Sterling arrived at 7:30 exactly, her heels clicking against marble floors with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether she belonged somewhere. She wasn't what Marcus had expected from the Forbes photos that showed up in internet searches. Wasn't all severe business suits and Ice Queen stares. She looked tired, expensive, perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, but shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, tension in her jaw that spoke to stress no amount of money could eliminate. She was already on her phone when she entered the room, mid-conversation, barely glancing in Marcus's direction as she set down a leather briefcase that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "I don't care what the zoning board says, James. Find the loophole." Her voice was sharp, controlled, the kind of tone that expected immediate compliance. "We have 6 weeks until groundbreaking, and I'm not pushing the timeline because some bureaucrat wants a bigger bribe." Marcus poured water into her glass, silent and efficient, trying to blend into the expensive wallpaper. The voice on speakerphone tried to interject something about delegation, about taking breaks, and Victoria cut him off with surgical precision. "Call me when you have a solution." She ended the call and finally looked up at Marcus, her eyes pale blue and assessing in a way that made him feel simultaneously visible and transparent. "Coffee, black, and I'll have the smoked salmon with poached eggs." "Right away, Ms. Sterling." He turned toward the door just as it swung open, a young server stumbling through carrying a tray of water pitchers. Her eyes wide with the particular panic of someone new who'd just realized they were in over their head. Emma, he thought her name was. 19, single mother, started last week. She didn't see the step down into the private dining area. Marcus saw it happen in slow motion. The physics inevitable. Her foot catching the edge, the tray tilting forward, water arcing through the air in a crystalline wave aimed directly at Victoria Sterling's back. He moved without thinking, muscle memory from 3 years of catching things Isaiah dropped, reflexes honed by fatherhood, grabbed Emma's arm, yanked her sideways, the tray clattering to the floor with a crash that seemed to echo forever. Water splashed across Marcus's uniform, soaked into his shoes, the cold shock of it bringing him fully present in a way he hadn't been all morning. Pitchers shattered across marble. Water pooled around Victoria's chair, droplets on her suit jacket. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Emma looked like she might cry, her hands shaking, 20 years old and probably already calculating how she'd pay rent without this job. Victoria stood slowly, water dripping from her sleeve, and turned around with an expression Marcus couldn't read. "I am so sorry." The words came out before he could think about them. "That was completely my fault. I should have been watching the door." Victoria's eyebrow arched slightly. "Your fault? You weren't carrying the tray?" "I was blocking the path. I apologize for the disruption, Ms. Sterling. I'll get you a towel and fresh coffee immediately." He could feel Emma shaking beside him, could hear Claire's heels clicking rapidly across the restaurant floor toward them. This was the part where he'd get fired. He'd been fired from jobs for less, and he needed this job. Needed every shift and every dollar, but Emma needed it more. Single mother with a baby at home, working 2 jobs just like he was, trying to survive in a city that ate people like them alive. Victoria studied him for a long moment, her gaze moving from his face to his soaked uniform to Emma half hidden behind him. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before, thoughtful rather than angry. "What's your name?" "Marcus Hayes, ma'am." "How long have you worked here, Marcus Hayes?" 6 months. "And her?" Victoria nodded toward Emma. "This is her 2nd week." Another pause. Then Victoria pulled out her phone, and Marcus's heart sank. She was documenting it. Evidence for the complaint she'd file with management. Probably with corporate. Definitely with whoever would listen to a billionaire who'd been inconvenienced by incompetent staff. Ms. Sterling, I'm so terribly sorry. Claire arrived breathless, phone already out to call maintenance, her face flushed with the particular panic of someone whose job depended on keeping wealthy customers happy. Victoria didn't look at her. It was an accident. These things happen. She turned back to Marcus, something unreadable in her expression. I'd still like my coffee and salmon, please, and someone should clean up this glass before anyone else gets hurt. Claire grabbed Emma's arm, already hissing threats under her breath as she pulled the girl toward the kitchen. Marcus stood frozen for a second, not quite believing what had just happened. Victoria Sterling had sat back down and was typing on her phone as if nothing had occurred. No screaming, no demands to speak with ownership, no firing. He found his voice somehow. Your coffee, ma'am, right away. The kitchen was chaos as always, line cooks shouting in Spanish, pans clanging, the head chef screaming about a missing shipment. Marcus changed into a spare shirt one of the other servers lent him, black instead of white, but close enough that maybe no one would notice in the dim lighting. His hands were still shaking slightly as he poured fresh coffee, arranged the salmon on a plate with the precision Claire had drilled into all of them. When he returned to the private dining room, Victoria was reading something on her tablet, making notes with a stylus, her earlier phone conversation apparently forgotten. Marcus refilled her water glass, brought the extra lemon she requested, and otherwise stayed invisible. The way good servers were supposed to. She ate in silence for 20 minutes, working through emails or reports or whatever it was that billionaire CEOs worked on over breakfast. Marcus had almost convinced himself the incident was over when she spoke without looking up from her tablet. You lied. His throat tightened. Ma'am, you weren't blocking any path. That girl tripped on her own. Victoria's eyes flicked up to meet his, sharp and assessing. But you claimed responsibility anyway. Why? He could have deflected, could have insisted it was true, maintained the lie. But something about the way she asked, direct and genuinely curious rather than accusatory, made him answer honestly. She's new, probably needs this job. I figured I had a better chance of surviving the complaint than she did. So you threw yourself in front of the metaphorical bus? Something like that. Victoria picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, set it down with deliberate precision. The silence stretched out long enough to become uncomfortable before she spoke again. That's either incredibly noble or incredibly stupid. Marcus allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Probably both. For the first time since she'd walked into the restaurant, Victoria Sterling smiled. It was small, barely a curve at the corner of her mouth, but it was real in a way that transformed her entire face. Made her look younger, less carved from ice, and more human. I'll be back next Thursday. Same time. I'd like you as my server again. Of course, Ms. Sterling. She pulled out her wallet, sleek black leather that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly salary, and left $500 bills on the table. Marcus stared at the cash, certain he'd miscounted. $500. For a breakfast that had cost maybe $40. Ma'am, I think you made a mistake. She was already walking toward the door. I didn't. See you next week, Marcus Hayes. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Marcus stood alone in the private dining room looking at $500 in cash and wondered what the hell had just happened. Claire appeared in the doorway, her expression a complicated mix of relief and suspicion. Did she complain? No. She left this. Marcus held up the bills, still not quite believing they were real. Claire's eyes went wide. Holy shit, what did you do? Save her life. I didn't do anything. Just served her breakfast. Well, whatever you did, keep doing it. I'm putting you on private dining permanently. She was already walking away, muttering something about quarterly bonuses and customer satisfaction scores. Marcus pocketed the money carefully, his mind already racing through calculations. $500. That was almost 2 weeks of his janitorial salary. That was groceries and the electric bill and maybe finally replacing Isaiah's shoes that were 2 sizes too small. That was a rounding error compared to $140,000. But it was something. He finished his shift in a daze, his body going through the familiar motions of clearing tables and refilling coffee, while his brain tried to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. Isaiah's deteriorating heart, the impossible surgery cost, Victoria Sterling's inexplicable generosity. By the time he clocked out at 3, his feet ached and his back hurt, and he wanted nothing more than to go home and sleep for a week. Instead, he headed to the subway, bound for Brooklyn and the studio apartment where Margaret was watching Isaiah draw pictures or read books or whatever quiet activities a 6-year-old with a failing heart was allowed to do. The envelope with $500 felt heavy in his pocket, life-changing money for someone like him. Pocket change for someone like Victoria Sterling. The distance between those two realities was so vast it might as well have been measured in light years instead of dollars. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Isaiah's asking when you'll be home. Drew you a picture. Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion, typing back a quick response that he was on his way. The subway car was packed with the afternoon crowd, and he found a spot by the door hanging onto the overhead rail as the train lurched into motion. Through the scratched window, Manhattan blurred past in streaks of steel and glass, buildings that reached toward the sky like they were trying to escape gravity. Somewhere up there, Victoria Sterling was probably in a boardroom or a penthouse or wherever billionaires spent their afternoons, already forgetting about the server who'd kept her from getting splashed with water. And somewhere in Brooklyn, Isaiah was waiting for his father to come home, unaware that his heart was failing further than anyone had predicted, unaware that Marcus had no idea how to save him, unaware of anything except that Daddy always came back. Marcus closed his eyes against the afternoon light. 8 weeks until complete heart failure. $140,000 he didn't have. $500 from a woman who'd smiled at him like he was human instead of invisible. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Thursday arrived with the inevitability of debt collectors and medical appointments, bringing Victoria Sterling back to Aurelius at 7:30 sharp. Marcus had spent the week trying not to think about her, trying to focus on Isaiah's breathing exercises and his own mounting panic about surgery costs. But Claire had made sure he knew exactly which tables he'd be serving, and exactly how catastrophic it would be if he somehow disappointed their most generous tipper. Victoria looked different this time. Still expensive, still composed, but there was something softer in the way she moved, like she'd left some of the armor at home. She requested the same private dining room, ordered the same black coffee and smoked salmon, barely glanced at Marcus as he poured water with hands steadier than they'd been last week. She worked through breakfast the same way she had before, tablet propped against the orchid centerpiece, stylus moving across the screen in swift, decisive strokes. Marcus refilled her coffee twice, brought extra lemon without being asked, existed in the professional periphery where servers lived. When she finished and pulled out her wallet, he braced himself for normal gratitude, maybe 20% if he was lucky. $500 bills again, crisp and deliberate. Ms. Sterling, this is too much. She looked up from gathering her briefcase, one eyebrow raised in the expression that might have been amusement. Is there a maximum amount I'm allowed to tip? No, ma'am, but this is more than the meal cost. You protected someone who needed protecting. That's worth more than salmon and eggs. She stood, smoothing her skirt with one hand. Same time next week, Marcus. The pattern established itself over the next 3 Thursdays. Victoria arrived punctual as debt, ordered the same breakfast, worked through her meal in focused silence, left $500 like it meant nothing. Marcus stopped trying to refuse. $500 a week was $2,000 a month, was $24,000 a year if this somehow continued, which it wouldn't, because nothing good lasted and he'd learned not to trust windfalls. But he took the money anyway, paid down credit cards, bought Isaiah new shoes, put $300 into a savings account that still had $116,000 to go before it could save his son's life. The 4th Thursday, Victoria arrived 10 minutes late, which was unusual. Her hair was slightly disheveled and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, tension radiating from her shoulders like heat from pavement. She collapsed into the chair rather than sitting, which was also unusual. And when Marcus poured her coffee, she closed her eyes like the caffeine was the only thing keeping her upright. "Long morning, Ms. Sterling. Long year." She rubbed her temples, a gesture so human it made Marcus see her differently, not as a billionaire but as someone who got headaches and felt tired. "Do you ever feel like you're running as fast as you can but still falling behind?" The question hit closer than she could have known. Marcus thought about Isaiah's deteriorating heart, about working 3 and still being nowhere near enough, about the way time moved differently when you were watching your child die. Every day, Victoria opened her eyes, really looking at him for the first time since she'd started coming to Aurelius. And something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or the acknowledgement that exhaustion looked the same regardless of bank balance. "You have a child, don't you?" He was surprised she knew, surprised she'd bothered to find out. "A son, Isaiah. He's 6. And you work here plus other jobs?" 3 others, yeah, when I can get the shifts." The conversation should have ended there, should have retreated back into the comfortable distance between customer and server. But Victoria kept looking at him with those pale blue eyes that seemed to see through pretense into something raw. The Father of the Year award must be exhausting. Marcus couldn't tell if she was mocking him or not, so he answered carefully. "It's what you do when someone depends on you." "Yes." Something in her voice softened, gone, almost wistful. "It is." She returned her attention to her tablet, and Marcus brought her breakfast and the moment passed. But when she left, the $500 came with a small, wrapped package that hadn't been there before, plain brown paper and twine. He opened it in the kitchen during his break, hands careful on the wrapping. A children's book, hardcover, new, about a boy who builds a rocket ship from cardboard boxes. The kind of thing Isaiah would love. The kind of thing Marcus never bought because books were a luxury when you were choosing between electricity and groceries. There was no note, no explanation, just the book and the implication that Victoria Sterling had thought about his son enough to pick out a gift. Claire appeared over his shoulder, eyes narrowing at the package. "What's that?" "Nothing, just something from a customer." "From Sterling? Jesus, Hayes, what did you do, save her from a burning building? I've been working here 5 years and she's never even made eye contact with me." Marcus rewrapped the book carefully, tucking it into his bag. "I just do my job." "Yeah, well, keep doing it. Whatever magic you're working, it's keeping the boss off my back about quarterly numbers." The following Thursday marked 5 weeks since Victoria had started requesting him specifically, and she arrived looking worse than Marcus had ever seen her. The suit was still impeccable, but there was a brittleness to her composure that suggested something had cracked. And she wasn't wearing makeup at all, which made her look younger and more vulnerable and entirely too human. She didn't open her tablet, didn't pull out her phone, just sat staring at the untouched coffee Marcus had poured. Her hands wrapped around the cup like she was trying to steal its warmth. Marcus hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt, but Victoria spoke without looking up. "Cancel my breakfast order, I'm not hungry." "Of course." He should have left then. should have respected the obvious desire for solitude, but something in her posture made him pause. "Are you all right, Miss Sterling?" "No." The honesty was startling, raw in a way that felt like watching someone bleed. "Do you follow business news, Marcus?" "Not really." "Lucky you." She finally looked up and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying or wanted to. "My ex-partner is trying to force me out of my own company. Hostile takeover. He's been working on it for months and I didn't see it coming until it was too late." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, didn't have any frame of reference for corporate warfare, so he just stood there holding his empty serving tray like an idiot. Victoria laughed, but it was bitter and small. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. It's not your problem. Sounds like he's a real piece of work. That's one way to put it." She took a long drink of coffee, her hands steadier now. "Garrett has been trying to destroy me since I ended our relationship 3 years ago. This is just his latest approach and it might actually work." The name registered somewhere in Marcus's memory. Fragments of gossip he'd overheard from other servers. Garrett Cross, former CFO of Sterling Properties, known for being ruthless and well-connected and the kind of wealthy that made Victoria's wealth look modest. The kind of man who could buy politicians and influence and apparently entire companies if he wanted them badly enough. "I'm sorry you're dealing with that." Victoria studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "You don't read about me, do you? You don't know anything about my life outside these Thursday mornings." "I try not to make assumptions." "That's refreshing." She leaned back in her chair, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Everyone else I know wants something. They smile and nod and wait for the right moment to ask for favors or connections or money. But you actually tried to refuse extra payment because you thought it was too much." Marcus thought about Isaiah's surgery fund, about how desperately he needed every dollar Victoria left, about the fact that noble poverty was a luxury he couldn't afford. There's no such thing as too much when someone earns it. Her phone buzzed against the table, screen lighting up with what looked like an urgent message. Victoria glanced at it and sighed, the exhaustion returning to her face like a mask sliding back into place. "I have to go. Emergency board meeting." She stood gathering her briefcase with practiced efficiency, and this time she left only $200 on the table. Marcus tried not to feel disappointed, tried to remember that she didn't owe him anything, that he should be grateful for whatever generosity she chose to extend. But then she paused in the doorway, turning back with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Are you happy?" The question caught him completely off guard. He thought about Isaiah's failing heart, about the surgery that would cost more than he'd earn in 5 years, about Sarah's grave that he visited every month because guilt wouldn't let him stay away. "I have my son, that's enough. But is it what you wanted, this life?" No one had asked him that in 3 years. No one had cared whether losing his career and his wife and his future had been what he wanted. Because wanting things was irrelevant when you were drowning. Marcus met Victoria's eyes, saw genuine curiosity there rather than pity, and answered honestly. "No, but it's what I have." Victoria nodded slowly like he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. "I'll see you next week." She left and Marcus cleared the table and the restaurant filled with the lunch rush that required his attention elsewhere. But he kept thinking about the question, about what it meant that Victoria Sterling cared whether he was happy, about the fact that her asking had made him realize he'd stopped asking himself years ago. The next Thursday brought a different kind of conversation. Victoria arrived on time, ordered breakfast, ate in her usual focused silence. But when she finished, instead of pulling out her phone to check messages, she closed her tablet deliberately and looked at Marcus with the expression of someone about to jump off a cliff. "I'm hosting a private dinner tomorrow night. 10 guests, business associates. I need additional serving staff and the regular catering company is short-handed." She paused, and something flickered across her face that might have been nervousness. "Are you available tomorrow night?" Marcus ran through his schedule mentally. Friday was supposed to be a delivery shift, 4 hours that would bring in maybe $60 after gas. If this paid anything close to what Victoria tipped for breakfast, he'd be stupid to refuse. "What time?" "7. It'll run until around 11. She pulled out a business card, cream-colored paper with elegant lettering, and slid it across the table. "I'll pay you $2,000 for the evening." The number hit like a physical blow. $2,000. That was a month of his janitorial salary, was Isaiah's medication for 3 months, was a meaningful dent in the surgery fund that currently stood at $28,000 and needed to be $140,000 yesterday. His throat had gone dry. "That's very generous, Ms. Sterling. You'll be working. I expect professional service." Her tone was crisp, businesslike, but her eyes were watching him carefully. "If you're interested, here's the address. Employee entrance is on the west side of the building. Ask for James Wallace, my head of household staff. He'll brief you." Marcus took the card, his fingers careful on the expensive paper. The address was in Tribeca, the kind of neighborhood where apartments started at 8 figures. "I'll be there." "Good." Victoria stood, and for just a second something that might have been relief crossed her face before the professional mask settled back into place. "Thank you, Marcus." She left $400 this time, and Marcus pocketed both the cash and the business card, already calculating how he'd rearrange his schedule to make Friday work. $2,000. He could put half toward the surgery fund and use the rest to pay down the credit card that was charging 22% interest. Maybe finally fix the radiator in the apartment so Isaiah wouldn't have to sleep in layers during the winter. He told Margaret about the dinner that afternoon, after his shift ended and he'd picked Isaiah up from her apartment where she'd been teaching him to play chess with a patience Marcus envied. She listened without interrupting, her weathered hands still moving yarn through knitting needles in the rhythm that never seemed to stop. "This woman," Margaret's voice was careful, the kind of careful that preceded uncomfortable questions. "She's been good to you?" "Yeah, really good." "And you trust her?" Marcus thought about Victoria's exhaustion, about the way she'd asked if he was happy like she actually cared about the answer, about the children's book she'd given Isaiah without expecting anything in return. "I think so." Margaret nodded, needles clicking together in a steady pulse. "Then you be careful. People with money like that, they don't usually notice people like us unless they want something. Maybe she just needs help serving dinner." "Maybe." Margaret didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe she sees something in you that you don't see in yourself yet. Either way, you watch yourself. Pride's important, but so is keeping a roof over that boy's head." Friday arrived with the weight of expectation Marcus hadn't felt since his analyst days, when presentations to senior partners could make or break quarterly bonuses. He dropped Isaiah off with Margaret early, endured his son's excited questions about where Daddy was going all dressed up, and took the subway to Tribeca with his heart beating faster than the situation warranted. The building was glass and steel reaching toward clouds, the kind of architecture that existed to remind people about the distance between wealth and everyone else. Security in the lobby checked his ID against a list, directed him to a service elevator that was somehow nicer than the main elevator in his own building, and sent him up to a penthouse floor that had only one door. James Wallace answered his knock, a man in his 60s with perfect posture and the kind of British accent that suggested private schools and inherited refinement. He sized Marcus up in one efficient glance, nodded once, and gestured him inside. "Mr. Hayes, welcome. We have 20 minutes before guests arrive." The penthouse was breathtaking in a way that made Marcus feel like he'd stepped into a different dimension. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River and Manhattan skyline. Furniture that managed to look both comfortable and priceless, art on the walls that belonged in museums, space. So much space that his entire apartment could have fit in the living room with space left over. James led him through a quick tour, pointing out the kitchen where two other servers were already prepping, the dining room with its table set for 10, the service protocols Victoria expected, professional, efficient, invisible. Marcus had done this dance before at corporate dinners back when he'd been the one being served and muscle memory took over where nervousness wanted to paralyze. The other servers were clearly professionals who did this regularly, their movements practiced and synchronized. Marcus felt out of place among them, felt the weight of his thrift store shoes and the shirt he'd ironed 3 times to get the creases right. But James treated him with the same brisk courtesy he showed everyone, which helped. Guests began arriving at 7 sharp. Titans of industry, every one of them. CEOs and investors and a senator Marcus recognized from news coverage. They spoke in shorthand about deals worth hundreds of millions, about policy decisions that would affect thousands of lives, about power plays and strategic moves that sounded more like chess than business. Victoria presided over it all with calm authority. She'd changed into a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than a car, her hair swept up, diamond earrings catching the light. She looked untouchable, a woman who commanded rooms and shaped cities with a phone call. Nothing like the exhausted person who'd asked Marcus if he was happy. But twice during the evening when Marcus was refilling wine glasses or clearing plates, her eyes found his across the room. Just for a second, just long enough for him to see the person underneath the CEO, the woman who got headaches and felt tired and was fighting a battle she might lose. The guests left around 11 as promised, and James dismissed the other servers with envelopes that presumably contained their payment. He asked Marcus to stay and help with final cleanup, which seemed odd since the other servers were more experienced. But Marcus wasn't about to argue with the man who controlled his paycheck. By midnight, the penthouse was restored to its previous perfection, and James appeared with an envelope thicker than Marcus expected. "Ms. Sterling asked me to give you this. Good work tonight." Marcus opened it in the service elevator going down, hands shaking slightly. $2,500 bills, not $2,000, $2,500. The security guard in the lobby wished him a good night, and Marcus stepped out into February cold that felt sharper than it had any right to, clutching an envelope that contained more cash than he'd seen in months. His hands were shaking, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. Wealthy people didn't notice servers. They didn't request the same one repeatedly. They didn't pay triple for a few hours of work or ask personal questions or care whether you were happy. Whatever was happening, Marcus didn't understand it, and that made him nervous. But Isaiah needed new shoes, and the landlord was threatening eviction over late rent, and the medical debt wasn't going away. Marcus pocketed the money and headed for the subway, trying not to think about Margaret's warning that people with money like that always wanted something. He didn't see the photographer across the street, camera with telephoto lens pointed at the penthouse windows, capturing images of the young man in serving clothes leaving the building just after midnight. 3 weeks passed in a pattern that felt increasingly surreal. Victoria continued her Thursday breakfasts, continued requesting Marcus, continued tipping amounts that seemed designed to keep him off balance. She hired him for 2 more private dinners, each time paying more than she'd promised, each time treating him with a mix of professional distance and personal warmth that Marcus couldn't decode. The money was extraordinary, enough that he paid his rent on time for the first time in a year, bought Isaiah new clothes that actually fit, started a savings account that was growing faster than he'd dared hope. The surgery fund stood at $43,000 now, still nowhere near enough, but better than the nothing he'd had 2 months ago. But the attention was increasing in ways that made Marcus uncomfortable. Other staff at Aurelius whispered about his sudden good fortune. Claire made pointed comments about knowing the right people. The other servers treated him with a mixture of resentment and curiosity that felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Marcus tried to ignore it. He showed up on time, worked hard, went home to his son. Whatever interest Victoria Sterling had in him would eventually fade. Wealthy people moved on. This was temporary. Then came the Thursday morning that changed everything, arriving with the particular dread that preceded disasters you could see coming but couldn't prevent. Victoria looked worse than Marcus had ever seen her. The suit was wrinkled, actually wrinkled, which seemed impossible for someone whose appearance was usually flawless. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup, and the shadows under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. She sat down heavily, the grace that usually characterized her movements completely absent. "Coffee, and cancel my breakfast order. I'm not hungry." Marcus poured the coffee, watching her cradle the cup like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "Are you all right, Ms. Sterling?" "No." She pulled out her phone with a hand that trembled slightly, slid it across the table toward him. "Do you follow business news, Marcus?" "Not really." "Lucky you." The screen showed a news article headline in bold type. "Sterling Properties faces hostile takeover attempt. Former partner seeks control of empire." Marcus scanned the article quickly, piecing together fragments about corporate power struggles and shareholder votes and someone named Garrett Cross trying to acquire enough shares to force Victoria out of her own company. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but Marcus didn't know what else to offer. Victoria laughed, sharp and bitter. "Don't be. Garrett has been trying to destroy me since I ended our relationship. He's just getting more creative about it." "Sounds like a real prize." "That's one way to put it." She took a long drink of coffee, her hands steadier now. 3 years together, and the moment I ended it, he dedicated his life to taking everything I built. Marcus had no frame of reference for that kind of sustained revenge, for the particular cruelty of someone using intimate knowledge as a weapon. His divorce from Sarah had been about leukemia, not malice. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." Victoria's phone buzzed against the table, another urgent message joining the dozens already waiting. "Emergency board meeting this afternoon. Garrett's pushing for a vote to remove me as CEO unless I can prove the company's stable under my leadership." She gathered her things with movements that lacked their usual precision, exhaustion making her clumsy. When she pulled out her wallet, she left $500 as always. But there was something perfunctory about the gesture now, like habit rather than intention. Then she paused, one hand on her briefcase, and looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. Desperation, maybe, or the particular vulnerability that came from having run out of options. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Are you happy?" The question again, but different this time, weighted with context he hadn't had before. Marcus thought about the money she'd been giving him, about whether this had all been leading somewhere he hadn't seen coming, about what it meant that she kept asking as if his answer mattered. "I have Isaiah. That's enough." "But is it what you wanted? This life?" They'd had this conversation before, but Victoria was looking at him like she needed to hear the answer again. Like his honesty was the only real thing in a world full of performance. Marcus met her eyes, saw the fear there that money couldn't fix, and told the truth. "No, but it's what I have." Victoria nodded slowly, like he'd given her something she needed even though he couldn't imagine what. "I have to go. I'll see you next week." She left and Marcus cleared the table, and something felt different in a way he couldn't name. Like a storm was building on a horizon he hadn't been watching closely enough. And by the time he noticed the clouds, it would be too late to find shelter. He was right. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was making Isaiah breakfast, scrambled eggs in the pan that had one broken handle and adibu that heated unevenly. His phone started buzzing at 6:15, which was unusual. Text messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Missed calls. Notifications from social media apps he barely used lighting up the cracked screen in rapid succession. He ignored them at first, focused on getting protein into Isaiah before the boy's cardiologist appointment at 9. The medication had been making him nauseous lately, and Marcus had learned to disguise nutrition in whatever form Isaiah would accept. Eggs with cheese, toast cut into triangles, orange juice in the plastic cup with dinosaurs that had survived 3 years of daily use. Isaiah pushed food around his plate with the particular listlessness that preceded bad days. And Marcus's chest tightened with the familiar fear that had become his constant companion. 6 weeks until surgery, $43,000 in the fund, $97,000 still needed. The math was getting less impossible, but math didn't care about progress when a child's heart was failing. His phone buzzed again, insistent. Marcus picked it up, intending to silence it completely, saw 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The first text was from someone he'd worked with at the delivery service. "Dude, is this really you?" Followed by a link. Marcus clicked it with fingers that had started to shake. The web page loaded slowly on his ancient phone, and then he was staring at his own face. A photo of him leaving Victoria's building after one of the private dinners, the headline above it reading, "Mystery Man Leaving Billionaire Victoria Sterling's Penthouse." After midnight, secret romance or something more sinister? His vision blurred at the edges. He scrolled down with hands gone numb, each new paragraph worse than the last. Photos of him pouring coffee at Aurelius, Victoria smiling at him across the table in a shot taken through the restaurant window. Another image of them that made innocent conversation look intimate. The article was full of speculation and innuendo, questioning who he was, suggesting everything from secret affairs to exploitation schemes. Sources close to Sterling Properties confirmed that the unidentified man has been seen regularly at Ms. Sterling's private residence and has been receiving substantial financial compensation for reasons that remain unclear. The words swam on the screen. The nature of their relationship has raised eyebrows among Manhattan's elite, with some suggesting the billionaire CEO may be the victim of manipulation by someone seeking to access her considerable fortune. Victim, manipulation. As if Marcus had planned any of this. As if he'd orchestrated being noticed by a woman who existed in a different stratosphere of wealth and power. The phone rang in his hand. Claire from Aurelius, her name bright on the caller ID. Marcus answered before he could think better of it, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Hello. Where are you right now?" Claire sounded frantic, her usual professional composure completely gone. "Home. Why?" "Don't come in today. Actually, don't come in at all. You're suspended pending investigation." The words hit like physical blows. "Investigation? Claire, what are you talking about?" "There are reporters outside the restaurant asking questions about you and Victoria Sterling. The owner is losing his mind. Did you really think this wouldn't become a problem?" Marcus looked at Isaiah, still pushing eggs around his plate, oblivious to the fact that his father's world was imploding. "I was working. I served food at private dinners she hired me for. That's it." "Well, it doesn't look like that's it." Claire's voice had gone hard, the warmth of their previous working relationship evaporating like morning fog. "Don't contact anyone from the restaurant until you hear from HR." She hung up. Marcus stood frozen in his tiny kitchen, the smell of burned eggs suddenly overwhelming, while his son ate breakfast and hummed a song from school. The phone buzzed again. Different number, but the pattern was the same. Unknown caller. Probably another reporter. He declined it. Another call came through immediately. Marcus stared at the screen, watching it ring, his brain trying to process what was happening. He'd lost his job. People thought he was manipulating Victoria Sterling. His face was all over the internet, attached to speculation that made him sound like a predator or a con artist or both. He answered the third call without thinking, some desperate part of him hoping it was Victoria, hoping she could explain or fix this or make it make sense. A woman's voice, professional and sharp as surgical steel. "Is this Marcus Hayes? Who's asking?" "Rebecca Chen from the Metro Daily. I'm doing a story on your relationship with Victoria Sterling and was hoping to get your side of things." The words came fast, practiced, the tone suggesting she'd done this hundreds of times before. "Can you confirm that you've been regularly visiting her penthouse? What is the nature of your relationship? Have you received money or gifts from Ms. Sterling?" Marcus hung up, his hands shaking hard enough that he nearly dropped the phone. It rang again immediately. Different number. He declined. Another call. Another. The notifications were coming so fast now that the screen was a constant flicker of incoming messages and missed calls and social media alerts telling him he'd been tagged in posts he didn't want to read. Isaiah was watching him now, his small face scrunched with concern that no 6-year-old should have to feel. "Daddy, who keeps calling you?" "Nobody, buddy, just work stuff." The lie tasted like ash. "Finish your breakfast, okay? We need to get you to the doctor." But when Marcus walked Isaiah to the bus stop 20 minutes later, there were two people with cameras waiting outside his building. They started taking pictures the moment he stepped onto the sidewalk. Rapid clicks that sounded like violence, and Marcus grabbed Isaiah's hand tighter than he meant to. "Mr. Hayes, can you comment on your relationship with Victoria Sterling?" A man in a jacket that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent stepped forward, microphone extended like a weapon. "How long have you been seeing her? Is it true she's paying you?" Marcus kept walking, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, trying to shield Isaiah with his body. The boy was looking around with wide, frightened eyes, not understanding why strangers were shouting at his father, why bright lights were flashing in their faces. "Don't look at them." Marcus kept his voice low, steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. "Just keep walking." They made it to the bus stop. Marcus knelt to Isaiah's level, blocking the photographers with his back, trying to arrange his face into something that wouldn't scare his son more than he was already scared. "Listen to me, buddy. Some people are going to be asking weird questions for a little while. If anyone approaches you at school, you don't talk to them. You go find your teacher immediately, understand?" Isaiah's bottom lip trembled. "Why are they taking pictures of us?" "Because they're confused about something and they think I can help them. But it's nothing bad, okay? Everything's fine." Another lie. Nothing was fine. But Isaiah was 6 years old with a failing heart, and he didn't need to carry his father's panic on top of his own fear. The bus arrived, yellow and familiar and safe. Marcus hugged Isaiah tight enough to feel the rapid flutter of his son's damaged heart, kissed his forehead, watched him climb aboard with his backpack and his lunch and his innocence that was being stripped away by circumstances he had no power to control. As the bus pulled away, Marcus turned to face the photographers who had followed them down the block. "I have nothing to say. Please leave me alone." "Just a few questions, Mr. Hayes." "No." He started walking back toward his building, ignoring the shouted questions, ignoring the cameras tracking his movement like targeting systems. Inside, he locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, trying to remember how to think through the static in his head. His phone wouldn't stop. He turned it off completely, but that just made the silence worse. Made him imagine all the calls and messages piling up like snow in a blizzard. He sat on the edge of the fold-out couch and tried to figure out what to do. This was insane. He'd served food at some dinners. He'd been polite and professional. Victoria had tipped generously, but that wasn't illegal. There was no relationship beyond employer and employee. No secret affair, no manipulation. Why was this a story? But even as he thought it, Marcus knew why. Because Victoria Sterling was one of the most powerful women in New York. and he was nobody. Because the optics looked bad even though nothing bad had happened. Because the internet loved scandal, especially one that suggested a wealthy woman might be getting exploited by a poor man or vice versa, the narrative shifting depending on which version generated more clicks. He pulled out his laptop, the one he'd bought used 5 years ago that took 3 minutes to boot up, and searched his own name. The results made him physically ill. Dozens of articles, blog posts, social media threads. People he'd never met discussing his life, his choices, his motives, dissecting him like a lab specimen. The comment sections were vicious. Obviously a gold digger. She's lonely and he's taking advantage. What kind of man uses a billionaire for money? This is what happens when people get desperate. Someone had found his teaching certification and was speculating about why he'd left the profession. Sarah's obituary had been discovered and twisted into a sob story he was supposedly using to manipulate Victoria. There were photos of Isaiah, his son's face plastered across gossip sites with captions questioning what kind of father would put his child in this situation. Marcus closed the laptop before he put his fist through the screen. He sat in silence for a long time, trying to control his breathing, trying to figure out what to do when every option felt like drowning. He needed to talk to Victoria. She had to know what was happening, had to have lawyers who could fix this, issue a statement, make it clear that their relationship was purely professional. But he didn't have her personal number. All their interactions had been through the restaurant or arranged by James Wallace. He couldn't exactly call Sterling Properties and ask to be transferred to the CEO. The ancient landline rang, the corded phone that came with the apartment and that Marcus had kept because it was cheaper than a second cell line. He picked up, hoping against logic that it might be Victoria, that she'd somehow found a way to reach him. "Marcus, it's James Wallace, from Ms. Sterling's residence." Relief flooded through him so intense it felt like pain. "James, thank God. Is Ms. Sterling aware of what's happening?" "She's aware." James's British accent remained perfectly composed, even delivering bad news. "She's currently in meetings with her legal team and public relations advisors. She asked me to contact you directly. Are you safe? Are there reporters at your location?" "There were 2 outside earlier. I don't know if they're still there." "Stay inside. Don't speak to anyone from the media. Ms. Sterling's lawyers will be issuing a statement this afternoon clarifying the nature of your employment relationship." He paused, and something in the silence felt weighted. "In the meantime, she wanted me to give you her private number in case you need to reach her directly." James recited the number. Marcus wrote it on the back of an envelope with a pen that barely worked, his hand shaking hard enough to make the digits almost illegible. "Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know how this happened, but I never meant for any of this to affect her. She knows that. She also wanted me to tell you that she's handling it. Don't worry." "Don't worry," as if that were possible when his face was all over the internet and reporters were stalking his apartment and he'd just lost his job. As if worry was optional when the surgery fund he'd been carefully building might not matter because the scandal could cost him everything else. After James hung up, Marcus sat with Victoria's number in his hand for 15 minutes before he found the courage to call. The phone rang 3 times, each one feeling like an eternity before she answered. "Marcus." Her voice was tense but controlled, the CEO armor fully in place. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Victoria. I don't understand what's happening. I didn't talk to any reporters. I know you didn't. This is Garrett." The name came out bitter, sharp with a fury Marcus had never heard from her before. "My ex. He hired a private investigator to follow me months ago. The photographer, the leaked photos, the anonymous sources feeding information to tabloids, it's all him." Marcus felt anger surge through him, hot enough to burn. "So I'm just collateral damage in his revenge plot?" "Yes." Victoria's honesty was almost startling in its bluntness. "And I'm sorry, I should have anticipated this. I should have been more careful." "Careful about what? Hiring someone to serve dinner? About being seen with someone who doesn't fit the narrative people expect? About letting myself have one small part of my life that felt normal. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone softer. I liked our Thursday mornings, Marcus. You didn't treat me like a walking checkbook or a networking opportunity. You were just real. That's rare in my world. Something in Marcus's chest tightened painfully. I was just doing my job. No, you weren't. You were being kind. There's a difference. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Marcus could hear voices in the background on her end, other people waiting for her attention, decisions that needed making. The distance between their worlds had never felt more vast. My lawyers are preparing a statement. Victoria's tone shifted back to business, the moment of vulnerability closing like a door. It will make clear that you were hired as private event staff on several occasions, that there is no romantic or inappropriate relationship between us, that all compensation was appropriate for services rendered. Will it work? Will that calm things down? Honestly, I don't know. The internet has already decided what it wants to believe. Marcus thought about the comment sections, about people who'd made up their minds based on photos and speculation. What about your company, the board meeting? I'm going to have my security team keep an eye on your building. If the press presence gets worse, let me know immediately. She was deflecting, not answering the question, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about how bad things were on her end. Victoria, you don't have to protect me. I can handle— Yes, I do. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. This is my fault. You're dealing with consequences that should be mine alone. Another pause, longer this time, filled with all the things neither of them was saying. Then Victoria sighed, exhaustion bleeding through the professional composure. I have to go. My PR team is waiting, but Marcus, if this gets too much, if you need anything, call me directly, day or night, okay? And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you're going through this. You don't deserve it. She hung up before he could respond. Marcus sat in his quiet apartment holding the phone, looking at the number that connected him to someone who existed in a completely different universe, and wondered how his life had spiraled so completely out of control in the span of a single morning. The statement from Victoria's lawyers was released at 2 in the afternoon. Marcus read it on his laptop, hope flickering weakly in his chest despite knowing better. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Properties, wishes to clarify recent media speculation regarding her professional relationship with Marcus Hayes. Mr. Hayes was hired on several occasions to provide catering support at private business functions hosted by Ms. Sterling. All compensation was appropriate for the services rendered. There is no personal relationship between Ms. Sterling and Mr. Hayes beyond a standard employer-employee arrangement. Ms. Sterling values her privacy and asks that the media respect the privacy of all parties involved. It was clear, direct, and completely insufficient. Within an hour, the internet had torn it apart. People questioned why a billionaire needed to hire one specific server repeatedly. Others pointed out that the photos showed them looking too comfortable with each other for a simple professional relationship. Conspiracy theories multiplied like bacteria. Some claimed Victoria was lying to protect her reputation. Others suggested Marcus had forced her to issue the statement. A few thought the whole thing was a publicity stunt. By evening, the story had grown bigger instead of smaller. News outlets were running segments about it. Talk shows were making jokes. Someone created a hashtag that was trending nationwide, and Marcus made the mistake of clicking on it, seeing his face attached to speculation that ranged from absurd to cruel. His other jobs called. The delivery company suspended him pending investigation into whether his notoriety violated their community standards policy. The warehouse told him not to come in until the media attention died down, which was corporate speak for "you're fired but we're too cowardly to say it directly." Within 24 hours, he'd lost every source of income except the money Victoria had already paid him. $43,000 in the surgery fund and $0 coming in to add to it or pay rent or buy groceries or keep the lights on. When Marcus picked Isaiah up from school that afternoon, a reporter tried to approach them in the parking lot. Marcus grabbed his son and practically ran to Margaret's apartment, where she took one look at his face and ushered them inside without asking questions. Isaiah was confused and scared, asking why people were following them, why his teacher had looked at him differently today, why other kids' parents were whispering. Marcus had no answers that wouldn't make things worse, so he held his son and lied about everything being fine and hated himself for it. Margaret made tea neither of them wanted while Isaiah played with blocks in the corner, building structures that would inevitably fall. "This will blow over." Her voice was gentle but firm. "People have short attention spans. Next week there'll be some new scandal and everyone will forget about you. What if they don't? Then you keep your head down and take care of your son, same as you've been doing for 3 years. She poured sugar into her cup with steady hands. "Easier said than done, I know, but you're stronger than you think." Marcus wasn't sure about that. He felt like he was made of glass, held together by willpower and the knowledge that Isaiah needed him, one wrong move away from shattering completely. He stayed at Margaret's until the crowd outside his building dispersed, then carried his exhausted son home through streets that felt hostile in a way they never had before. Every glance from a stranger felt like judgment. Every phone pointed in his direction might have been taking his picture. Paranoia was setting in, and Marcus knew it, but that didn't make it feel less real. Thursday came with the weight of dread and impossible hope. His usual morning to see Victoria at Aurelius, except he was suspended and couldn't go, and even if he could, the restaurant would be mobbed with photographers waiting to capture whatever scandal they imagined was unfolding. His phone rang at 7:30 exactly, Victoria's number on the caller ID. "I'm sorry." Her voice came through without preamble, rough with emotion he'd never heard from her before. "I know this was supposed to be our morning. It's fine. It's not fine. None of this is fine." She sighed, and Marcus could picture her rubbing her temples the way she did when stress got overwhelming. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay." "Garrett is going to approach you, maybe not today, maybe not this week, but soon. He's going to offer you money to say that I coerced you, that there was something inappropriate in our relationship, some lie designed to damage my reputation." Her words came faster now, urgent. "When he does, I need you to say no." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "You think I'd betray you for money? I think you're in an impossible situation because of me. I think you have a son who depends on you and bills that are crushing you. I think Garrett will offer enough money to change your life, and I wouldn't blame you for considering it." The implication hit harder than any accusation could have. She was right, and they both knew it. Marcus would do almost anything for Isaiah. Almost. "Even then?" Victoria's voice had gone quiet, vulnerable in a way that made Marcus ache. "Even if it means financial security for Isaiah?" Even then. He meant it with every fiber of his being. "I don't lie, Victoria, especially not about people who've only ever been decent to me." He heard her exhale, a sound that might have been relief or something deeper he couldn't identify. "Thank you." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, how Isaiah was handling things, whether the reporters were still camped outside Marcus's building, the weather, surface-level conversation that felt like holding on to normal when everything else had gone insane. When they hung up, Marcus felt slightly more settled. Whatever was happening, at least he and Victoria understood each other. At least he wasn't alone in this, even if the alliance felt impossibly fragile. Garrett Cross made contact 3 days later, exactly as Victoria had predicted. Marcus was taking out trash, moving quickly to avoid the single photographer who'd maintained vigil outside his building with the dedication of someone being paid well. A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, with the smooth silence of German engineering, and a man in a suit that cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe stepped out. Marcus Hayes. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the confidence of someone used to being right about everything. Marcus recognized him from internet searches he'd done after Victoria mentioned his name. Garrett Cross, 42, heir to pharmaceutical fortune, former CFO of Sterling Properties before Victoria pushed him out for reasons that were still disputed in business circles. Handsome in the way wealthy men often were, with good teeth and better hair and the particular arrogance that came from never being told no. I have nothing to say to you. I'm not a reporter. I'm someone who wants to help you. Garrett fell into step beside Marcus as he turned back toward his building, his tone conversational and friendly in a way that set every alarm bell ringing. I don't need help from you. Don't you? Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. You've lost your jobs. Your name is mud on the internet. You're drowning in debt with a son who needs surgery you can't afford. And you have a young child who's going to suffer because his father was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus stopped walking, something cold sliding down his spine. How do you know about Isaiah's surgery? I know everything, Marcus. That's what money buys, information. Garrett pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, cream-colored paper thick, with what could only be a check. I can fix all of this, everything. One conversation and your problems disappear. What do you want? The envelope appeared between them like a viper, Garrett's manicured fingers holding it with the delicacy of someone handling explosives. Tell the truth about Victoria, about how she used her wealth and position to take advantage of you, how she made you uncomfortable but you needed the money so you couldn't say no, how she manipulated a struggling single father for her own gratification. Disgust rolled through Marcus's stomach in waves. That's not what happened. Does it matter? Garrett's voice remained pleasant, reasonable, the tone of someone explaining simple math to a child. The public is already halfway to believing it. You give one interview, just one, confirming their suspicions, and I'll make sure you never have to worry about money again. He opened the envelope, showing Marcus the check inside. $250,000, made out to Marcus Hayes, signed and ready. The number echoed in Marcus's head. $250,000. Isaiah's surgery fully paid, with $60,000 left over for college or emergencies or the future Marcus had stopped believing in. Security, stability, everything he'd been fighting for since Sarah died. All he had to do was lie. Think about it. Garrett's smile widened, predatory and patient. Talk to your son. Ask yourself if your pride is worth his future. You have my number if you change your mind. He placed the envelope in Marcus's hand and walked back to his Mercedes, leaving Marcus standing on the sidewalk holding enough money to save his son's life and destroy Victoria's. The check felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Marcus stood there for a full minute, staring at his name written in elegant script next to an amount that would solve every problem he had. $250,000, more money than he'd earn in 5 years, enough to give Isaiah everything he deserved. But it would cost Victoria her company, her reputation, everything she'd built through decades of work, and it would cost Marcus something he'd managed to hold on to through poverty and grief and 3 years of barely surviving. His integrity. He tore the check in half, then in half again. Let the pieces fall to the sidewalk like snow, watch them scatter in the February wind. Garrett was still sitting in his Mercedes watching through tinted windows. He lowered one slightly, his expression shifting from smug confidence to cold calculation. Your son will die because of your pride. Marcus met his eyes, feeling rage burn through the fear that had been his constant companion. My son will live knowing his father has integrity. Can you say the same about yourself? He turned and walked back into his building, leaving Garrett and his torn check and his poisoned money on the street. Inside, Marcus's hands were shaking so hard he could barely get the key in the lock. But his conscience was clear. He'd kept one promise to Sarah. He wasn't about to break it now for Garrett Cross's revenge.